Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live on Wednesday, March 9th. We got some news to talk about, both Chargers related and not Chargers related. And then we'll dive into some of our top 10 interior draft rankings for this upcoming class. And joining me to do that are my guys, Tyler and Alex. Alex, I'm sure you had a fun day today as Mr. Carson Wentz was traded back to the NFC East. He's now a member of the Washington Commanders, which is still super weird to say. But Alex, how you doing, man?
I woke up this morning and I was feeling a little bit bitter about the whole Russell Wilson thing and missing out on him because, I felt like he would have been a good fit in Philly. I wish him the best of luck in getting his first conference championship game appearance since the Obama administration, and for Sierra to put out a good album for the first time since 2004. I wish them both the best of luck. But I found the light, and it was Washington Commanders trading draft assets for Carson Wentz and taking on a full $28 million contract. That gave me a big dopamine, serotonin, all the drugs there. It just gave me a hit, and I feel good. And Fletcher Cox gets to suplex him twice a year. Really great stuff.
I know. I would imagine Fletcher and company are going to have fun with that one. I can't wrap my head around that one, man. Like trading a potential second and a third rounder and taking on 100% of the contract for Carson Wentz. I feel like I'd rather just draft Desmond Ritter or somebody at 11 or Malik Willis.
I'd rather just have Taylor Heineke. You have Taylor Heineke for like $5 million. I'd rather just play him.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're new to the show, Alex does Victory Pink. And so this was a mini victory for him. So that is the reason why he's wearing a pink shirt again. So Tyler also here. Tyler, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm wearing funeral black. I can't wait to see how our content is repurposed and reused on other people's content. Yes, we're all watching you, so don't do that. Steven, I'm doing very well, but how was your appearance on ESPN Radio?
Alex cracking me up, man. I'm doing good. I went there's the local ESPN radio guy and I have become pretty close. So hopped on there earlier today to talk about really just kind of everything that's happening in the NFL right now. And you look at all the other all the other sports happening, like it's March Madness, and NFL headlines are still dominating the sports talk shows. So just kind of crazy. So doing great today. Happy to be here with my guys. I want to start with the Russell Wilson thing first, and then we'll get to obviously more of the Chargers stuff. So obviously the Denver Broncos have acquired Russell Wilson, and obviously if you are watching our show, you probably know that by now. They gave up a good amount to get him. However, I'm a little confused why Drew Lock is involved in the trade at all. But you get 2 firsts, 2 seconds, Noah Fant, and I think a 5th, missed that one, but Noah Fant and Shelby Harrison, Drew Lock. So Tyler, we'll start with you. Your initial reaction to the Denver Broncos acquiring Russell Wilson.
My initial reaction was, well, that's great. I'm sure Denver gave up a lot of their players. I'm sure Chubb is gone. I'm sure Judy's gone and a couple of firsts. That was my initial reaction. Then I read what they actually gave up to go get Russell Wilson. The Chargers really struggle to win in Denver, and I don't see how that got any easier after this trade. I mean, are they going to be set up for the failure in the future? Maybe because they're not the best drafting team, perhaps. But boy, this season, or for as long as they have Wilson and that defense, I'm very concerned now. Like, it is a true arms race. If the Chargers did not need to get more corners, more pass rushers, or more receivers before, they definitely need to do it now in the AFC West. So I'm nervous for sure. Like, I do think Herbert is the better quarterback. I do think the Chargers can be the better team than the Broncos, but this isn't really helping. Like, it's going to be a very, very difficult slug fest in the AFC West next season. Honestly, I kind of had just, if I were the Broncos, depends on what they did offensive coordinator, I probably would have just kept Fangio and kept that Fangio defense and then let, Russell Wilson do his thing. But I guess, obviously it didn't work out. So I'm worried for sure. I think the Chargers can be the better team, but it's going to be so hard to win in Denver now because now you have to also put up points, whereas you just kind of had to put up 17 before. What the Broncos score last time? 16 before the pick 6. Yeah. And now you have to score probably 20 something just to win in Denver. That's very difficult. So it's going to be a very, very difficult fight in the AFC West for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be really difficult in the AFC West. Obviously, Denver kind of manning up with Wilson. It seems like, I am a little bit relieved they had lost out on the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes, which kind of
Sure.
facilitated this trade because that I think would have been a real nightmare. I definitely think, I mean, Russell Wilson is an upgrade for them. I mean, just going from Drew Lock to Russell Wilson is like life changing. And I mean, he puts them in the caliber of being a playoff team. And like Tyler said, the return here is really underwhelming for Seattle. They
Yes.
trade a number 9 pick and a really bad QB class and a first round next year that's probably going to be in the 20s because you have Russell Wilson. And other than that, you traded Noah Fant. That's really the whole trade.
Yeah.
I for sure thought that a Surtain was going to be there. I thought a Judy was going to be in there, and they weren't. So even though Russ was worse last year, I thought that they would do better than this. And it just kind of seemed like a mess. I will say the one saving grace, if you're a Chargers fan going forward, is that they will, I mean, have to presumably extend Russell Wilson now, which I think is where a lot of Seattle's hesitancy to kind of bring him back kind of started. And if you're talking about a Russell Wilson who's going to be on a 4-5 year deal until he's 37, 38, that is something that I think makes this Denver window the next 2 or 3 years as opposed to the long term. Just because I think his athleticism kind of will decline, and he's really struggled in the last 2 years. As Mita Kimes put it on her podcast, since the too high safety look was created. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But look, I mean, Russ is a significant upgrade for them. He'll make that whole receiving core better. They didn't have to give up any key pieces to do it. So in the short term, I love the move for them. Offensive line definitely has to have some resources put into it, though, for Denver's sake. But long term, I think that this kind of starts the window on it now, and they do have to compete. Whereas the Chargers kind of had the luxury of Justin Herbert, the Chiefs had the luxury of Patrick Mahomes being these prime quarterbacks. It's kind of win now or bust, I think, for the Broncos.
It definitely is win now for bust. I want to give a quick shout out to Dago619 Cali Factor. I don't think I've seen you before, so if you're new, welcome. Thank you for the super chat. We'll definitely talk about JC Jackson and kind of the need for more turnovers, at a later time. But getting back to this Russell Wilson stuff, like it definitely makes things more difficult in the AFC West, man. Like I think for the better part of my life, you've always been able to look at the Raiders or the Broncos or the Chiefs, even at some points of saying like, okay, like I feel very confident that we'll at least split the season series there, and if not sweep. And so now every team in the AFC West is good. Every team in the AFC West is at least competent at the quarterback position. I know Chargers fans kind of hate Derek Carr, but I think he's a top 12 to 15 guy. So, I mean, having 4 of the top 12 to 15 quarterbacks in the same division is just kind of crazy to me. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. Like, I think already with the 3 that were in here last year was probably already the best quarterback division in the league. Now you add Russell Wilson, so things definitely get harder. I am not necessarily saying like the season is over or anything like that. The Chargers have other games, but I mean, it just makes things more difficult, and it kind of amplifies, what this offseason really means, because now you have to be on your A game every single week in this division to keep pace. Otherwise, you 1 game lost, 2 games losses here, it might push you down to 4th place in the division and kind of no way to get out of that hole. So things in the AFC West are going to be crazy next year and beyond that for sure.
I will say that if the Chargers can at least split with the Broncos, which I think they can do, given the 2 teams and how the Chargers will upgrade, that's kind of status quo for them. The difference will be, I think the Broncos will actually finally have a shot to maybe beat the Chiefs or maybe beat the Raiders. I believe they were swept by both last season. The Raiders just finding ways to win in Denver. The Chiefs just have their number in general. And so I think that be able to maybe knock down the Chiefs 1 game or the Raiders another game and just maintain that status quo with the Chargers kind of would help them. But then again, it's up to the Chargers to at least split with the Broncos this year.
Yeah, I mean the winning in Denver is always going to be difficult for this team. Obviously, this changes that. And I will say there's a lot of like Super Bowl contender talk being thrown around the Denver Broncos right now, and I get that. That's kind of the nature of the business. Den Orlovsky mentioning that he'd rather have Russell Wilson for the next 5 years instead of Justin Herbert, I think is kind of crazy. but very on par for the course there. I just think, to me, like the Broncos were kind of a fringe playoff contender. I think now they are a legitimate playoff contender with Russell Wilson. I'm very curious to see how I don't even know how to say his name, Ejiro Evero, I think is how you say it. The new defensive coordinator is a Vic Fangio disciple, but like Vic Fangio was pulling some miracles the last 2 seasons with that unit and keeping them elite. And last year they flew through like 8 different linebackers and they were still a top 5 unit. So I'm curious to see how that affects that. And then, like, honestly, this is kind of a downgrade in terms of supporting cast for Russell Wilson. I think the Seahawks offensive line is better. I think DK and Tyler Lockett are better. I just think that the Broncos supporting cast is being a little overstated, just based off of recent history. And I get like Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater and all that, but I mean, DK Metcalf is unequivocally the best receiver of the 2 teams, and I think Tyler Lockett might be second.
I don't get how Dan Orlovsky said that and claims to have like a functioning brain, or when he just goes on First Take. I mean, this is what happens, but he turns his brain on and off versus when he's doing film studies, so he can just be a hot take asshole. But yeah, no, saying 5 years of Russell Wilson over 5 years Justin Herbert, I'm like, Russell Wilson's already showing signs of decline. Like you can acknowledge them or you cannot, but like taking a 38-year-old Russell Wilson over 28-year-old Justin Herbert is just insane. But no, I mean, I think that this makes things harder for the AFC West in general. And I think, all of them have respectable quarterback play now. I just think these divisional games are going to be crazy. I mean, we talked about it, but it's like they're going to have 5 or 6 primetime games now because they're probably guaranteed to have a primetime game against each AFC West team because they're going to put Herbert and Russ in primetime. They're going to put Herbert and Mahomes in primetime. And based on the results of last season, they're going to put Herbert and Carr in primetime too. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out, but definitely a win for the Broncos. I'm just curious to see how it holds up long term. Who's their new offensive coordinator, by the way? I forget his name.
Nathaniel Hackett's going to be calling plays. I don't know who their actual OC is, though.
Well, yeah, Hackett's going to be calling plays. Did they hire? Am I thinking of Waldron?
Packers tight ends coach? Am I crazy?
Or no, I'm not sure exactly, but I do think, Hackett and that offensive system will kind of be interesting there. And I do think the thing to watch with Russ in general is he'll be running a lot of that kind of heavy play action stuff, kind of 2x2 concepts that he just does in general, where he just picks one side of the field and throws there. So I'll just be curious to see if Staley counteracts that. We talked about the 2 high safety thing, but more curious to see, based on this free agency, whether or not the Chargers will have the personnel to counteract that more so than the scheme.
Yeah, so the Broncos offensive coordinator is Justin Otten, however you say that. Yeah, he was the Packers offensive line coach. So
so he's there Ronaldo. Okay, so he's there Ronaldo Hill, but for offense. All right.
Yes, and Bolt Brett asking in the chat, like, the Chargers history versus Russ, I feel like has been pretty good. And Arjun pointed out today, his graphic of Russ's EPA per play in 2020, his 3 worst outings were against the Brandon Staley Rams defense and then also the Giants Patrick Graham defense. Obviously, Patrick Graham is the defensive coordinator for the Raiders. So, Russ does have a tendency to struggle against the 2 high schemes. And now every team he's going to be playing against is going to be playing 2 high schemes, at least in the division. So that's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. For the Seahawks side of things, I mean, they released Bobby Wagner yesterday. They trade Russ, and then they're also like in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes supposedly. So I don't know, man. That whole thing is just weird to me. I'm not going to say like they completely bombed this trade, but they should have gotten way more for Russell Wilson.
Regardless. Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I think there's like a real legitimate argument for trading Russell Wilson, like, because, I mean, giving him the Aaron Rodgers extension until, he's, 39 years old, not something I think that, franchises should be in love with. But yeah, the return, as I said earlier, is just really bad. I'm shocked they couldn't get another 1st round pick or at least a Surtain or something. But yeah, I mean, and it's also, really funny that people were just talking about those picks anyway. It's like, Seattle's just been programmed to like kind of, really sell all their picks and go all in. And now you have to rely on a GM and a coach that have drafted really poorly in back-to-back years. So I don't know. Like, yeah, it's a rebuild, but I also don't know if you have the people there that can rebuild.
Sorry, I'm just trying to look at the Broncos cap space moving forward. I mean, obviously they give them the extension. I'm curious if it makes some guys available. I don't know who, but I'm curious if they're thinking of making other moves in the future to get rid of.
I mean, they might get Von Miller back, so that's the thing. That's like my takeaway here is that George Payton, their new GM, like that guy, he knows what he's doing over there. I mean, you trade Von Miller for 2/3 or whatever it was, and now you're potentially signing him back. You get you fleece the Seattle Seahawks for Russell Wilson. I mean, George Payton knows what he's doing over there.
That's just great. That feels awesome.
Fun stuff. All right, guys. Any other thoughts here on Russell Wilson before we move on to the Mike Williams stuff?
Only that I'm really glad I don't have to care about which quarterback is playing for the Chargers because he's going to be playing for us for the next 15 years, pretty much. So
yes.
Don't have to worry.
And that man going to get 65 plus next year. It's going to be fantastic. Can't wait to see it. All right. So speaking of 60 plus, obviously the Chargers have done an extension with Mike Williams. He was not franchise tagged, which we all kind of assumed that he was. So we did get the official contract numbers courtesy of Over the Cap today for Mike Williams. Obviously 3 years, $60 million. The cap numbers for 2022 is $14 million. So they save about $5 million this year as opposed to franchise tagging him. In 2023, that cap number rises to $19 million. And that's all of his first 2 seasons are fully guaranteed. And then in 2024, he has a cap number of $27 million. If the Chargers wanted to get out of that contract, they would save $20 million by trading or cutting him. So really kind of a 2-year deal, lots of guaranteed money. I know Tyler and Arjun kind of did their thing yesterday. So Alex, we'll start with you. Your reaction to the Mike Williams extension.
I mean, I was really surprised it happened. I almost I thought it was a certainty he was getting the franchise tag and they'd figure it out sometime down the road. But it seemed like they were really close to a deal. And I sort of also maybe started to figure it out just because of how little we were hearing about it. And I was like, okay, so this kind of makes sense that this is happening. I think the deal is really good. I mean, people will pay attention to like the average annual value and just be like, well, I thought he was worth 17 and they think he's worth 20, but like, I don't think that really matters to me. Tom Telesco kind of, the cap hits for it have come out, and so I think that the cap hits are pretty sustainable. What is it? It's 14 million year one, 17 next year, and then 27, something like that.
14, 19.
14, 19, 27.
14, 19, 27. So, I mean, I think it's pretty flexible and, they timed that contract basically to, end with that Keenan Allen extension that they did. And of course, going into the first year of Justin Herbert's, new contract extension, whenever that'll be. I'm sure that'll be 60 million, but in average annual value by the time that we get there. So, no, I mean, I think it was a really good extension. They needed to keep him. Some people debate whether that should have just been for 1 year, but I'm kind of happy it's all behind us now. And at the end of the day, if Justin Herbert wanted Mike Williams, I think that you kind of had to do it. And I'm also happy that they agreed to an extension now, as Mr. Kicks points out in the chat here, that, you had Godwin or Adams or these guys that were going to sign big deals potentially after the franchise tag, and then up Mike Williams's value in some way. So maybe if they do it, in August, they're paying 24 million per year as opposed to 20. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's a pretty realistic scenario that could have happened. So I'm happy it happened when it happened. And I think that it's a really good move for the team going forward. You kind of have Keenan, who may be a little bit on the downslope, but you have kind of a surging Mike Williams, a guy that's going to be there, and they could still take a wide receiver in round 1. That's still an option that exists for them. And you're going to have Josh Palmer under contract. So I think as far as the receivers, they're pretty set there. And I just like the kind of consistency and going forward with Mike Williams.
Yeah, I've been in favor of a Mike Williams extension for a very long time. I feel like I was pretty clear that the franchise tag is kind of where I saw that going. I'm a little surprised at the amount of guaranteed money. $40 million guaranteed, 28 of it up front. Also, Adam Schefter and all these guys who are releasing contract info, like, please be more clear. Like, everybody on Twitter was freaking out about him having a $28 million cap hit in the first year, and that just was never going to be the case. So, that being said, I'm really happy that this is happening. And I was reading Daniel Popper's article about it yesterday, and something that he pointed out that just kind of like really reaffirmed that this is a good thing is that every time the Chargers got into a closely contested game and they needed a big play, they needed a spark, they needed a really clutch play to be made, it was always going to Mike Williams as opposed to Keenan Allen. And I'm not saying that Mike Williams is like the receiver one or anything like that, but that trust that Justin Herbert has built up with Mike Williams over the last 2 years cannot be replicated. So, of course, you had to pay a premium to keep him around, but I've been pretty clear from the start that in order to kind of, take advantage of Herbert's rookie window, like you can't get rid of Mike Williams unless you have like a legitimate backup plan in place already on the roster, and they didn't have that. So Mike Williams became essential. I was listening to Colin Cowherd's show today. He was commenting on it, that he reached out to Tom Telesco afterwards and basically said that the sentiment that was expressed was that you can't replace Mike Williams, his physicality, his body type, and also the relationship that he has with Justin Herbert, how important he is. So I'm in favor of this. The extension frees up the $5 million, like I said, this year, gives them some wiggle room next year and the year after that, has some flexibility. So I'm happy with this, man. I think this was as close to a slam dunk as possible. Obviously, I wish it was a little, $18 million instead, but, I'm happy with this overall.
Yeah, and I'm very happy with this too. And thank you, Arjun, for jumping on, helping out, because again, we all saw the 28 million in year one and we're thinking, how are we going to afford anything else? Like, that's impossible. And of course, Arjun broke it down and he was very, very close to the exact number. So really good job there. I could have gone either way with this deal. I completely understood bringing him back. I completely understood letting him go and kind of starting over, especially with that cost. But if you're going to bring him back, I don't think they could have done all that much better than this as far as the deal goes. I love the deal. I think his cap hit being, over the next 2 seasons, averages out to $16.5 million a year. And yeah, that third year is huge, but you have options. You can just cut him for, it's going to be $7 million in dead cap, but like, that's better than 27, and that's not that bad. And, or you can just give him another year and you can kind of lower that cap hit and push it down the road again. So, his cap hit of $14 million this year, it's less than Nelson Aguilar's. It's 18th in the league in 2022 in terms of that cap hit. And then depends on, obviously the new deals that could happen with, Adams or whatever. But you look at it's talking about the franchise, like if you franchise tag him this year, you don't get a deal done, and you head into next year. And let's say he has, a really good year. The free agent crop next year, especially if Adams and Godwin don't get new deals and they're just tagged in 2023, the receiver room for the free agents looks like Adams if they don't get a deal, Godwin if they don't get a deal. We'll see what happens with Gallup. But then Hill, Cooks, Debo, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin, and even Hunter Renfrow. Like, all those guys are free agents next year. and so if he had a better year than all of those guys, what kind of deal would he have had next year? After the tag this year, you're not going to tag him again, I don't think, or maybe, I guess. So getting this done now in a way that financially, if the goal was to keep him, doing it now, getting him to have that $14 million cap hit, I think is fantastic. It gives you the room to do some other things. And if it helps you bring back like Kaiser White, great. If it helps you bring back, even Justin Jones as a maybe rotational defensive tackle, great. There are some things you can do with this. If this is always the plan, this is the best possible option. I really think it's a 2-year deal with an out. They really couldn't have done this all that much better. Yes, it's a lot of guarantees. I think, where is it? I had it somewhere. 66%, right? Was the guaranteed amount of the contract that Arjun showed. Yeah, I think there was only 3 receivers that had over $14 million per year, but also 66 or like 60% or more guaranteed. And so, yes, it's a lot, but
I think you said Keenan's guaranteed percentage was like 40, wasn't it?
It was significantly lower. Like, he made the 4-quadrant box, and it was Williams and like 2 other dots. Like, that's how much was guaranteed and how much those guarantees were. But it's only 3 years. It's really only 2 years. They can get it after 2 years. and it's going to save them money, I think, in the long run. And obviously this year, it saves them money to go do, what they need to do.
Yeah, and really quickly, shout out to Arjun. He's got a Mike Williams article dropping tomorrow.
Mhm.
His prediction for the specific cap hits was basically dead on. So Arjun, definitely take a bow there. And anyone else that wants to steal his data, make sure you're going to give him a shout out next time. So quick shout out for Arjun there. But all in all, I do think this is really good for the Chargers. The question here, obviously, is where do they go from here in terms of improving the skill players around Keenan Allen and Mike Williams? And I know everybody kind of wants to focus in on the defense, but I mean, the Chargers need another weapon. I think you have your quote unquote big three with Austin Eckler in there, but whether it's a tight end or another receiver or something like that, they do need another weapon to kind of add to that, whether it's, Zach Ertz, Alex's guy, or something else, Cordero Patterson. But I would expect the Chargers, because of this friendly cap number, to be able to go out and get another weapon to be able to pair with the rest of the other guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of whether they or not they want to add Ertz, Patterson. I think they'll add definitely one guy in free agency that kind of is a primary like offensive weapon for them. And then I think probably in the draft, obviously they'll take a wide receiver, whether or not that's in the first round or not later on. There's some value there, of course. And, maybe they take another tight end in the draft too. But I definitely don't think they're done building on offense just because they gave this money to Mike Williams. Now that you have Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, you do have a small speed problem. That is something that I think they'll have to get a little bit more shifty in terms of the receivers behind those guys, in terms of the running backs behind Austin Eckler, who run, combined slower than Jordan Davis numbers right now. And so, I do think that, as a whole, the offense around those guys, if you are going to build it that way, does need to get a little bit faster in the spots where they can.
Yeah, I'm going to go with, and we sort of talked about it before the show. I assume a veteran tight end is the way they want to go. Telesco's kind of expressed that the room is sort of lacking that presence right now. And then, in the draft, find someone in the round you want. Let the draft you can kind of let it come to you. If there's a great edge rusher at 17, you can take him. Or if you want to go Jordan Davis at 17, you can take him. And then round 2, you can find somebody else that's fast. Round 3, find somebody else that's fast that can run a whole route tree. Day 3, Tyquan Thornton. Like, there are guys all throughout this draft, I feel like more than last year, that can really, really burn or get yards after the catch, whatever your flavor is. And I think whether it's a burner or yards after the catch guy or both, I think in each round you can find a guy that can do that. Some are better than others. So I think they're pretty, well set up. I hope that's what they go for. I hope they don't go find, David Bell. Like, oh yes, now we have our wide receiver 3. Like, I hope that's not the case. They don't need David Bell.
You're not into that 1.7 RES score.
No.
Jeez, it was that bad.
It was worse than.
I heard he had a bad
RES score,
combine, but. Yeah, I want a receiver slower than Larry Roundtree.
I get it. 40 times not everything, but I need you to not be a 1.7 RAS score. But yeah, so I'm really curious to see how that one pans out. I wouldn't be surprised, like Tyler's saying, like, if Jameson Williams was the pick at 17, if he's there, of course, sign me up for that, man. Like, I totally would understand that move. So we'll talk about Jordan Davis in a minute as we get to some of these big interior defensive linemen. Guys, before we get there, any other final thoughts on Mike Williams' extension?
No, just happy to continue the narrative of not taking care of your guys, including Joey Bosa, Keenan Allen, Derwin James, Casey. We're like, come on. Like, I hope we're past this. I assume that we are as an organization, or not organization, as a species. I hope we're past. Yeah, as a fan base. I hope as a human race, we are past this whole Chargers don't take care of their own thing, especially when they extend Derwin James in about.
Yeah, Mike Williams is the fourth highest APY. I was told the Chargers were too cheap, so I don't. That must be a typo.
The Chargers could give $80 million to Justin Herbert per year tomorrow, and they would still call him cheap, dude. Like, they're never gonna get over that. True,
very true. All right. That being said, we're gonna jump back into some of our draft rankings. Those Jordan Davis's guys and all the Georgia players. I think if you just put 10 Georgia defensive tackles right here, I think you'd probably have an accurate list. But Really excited to see how this one pans out. As always, we're going to go 10 to 7 and then 6 through 4 and then the top 3. So I'll kick us off here this time. At number 10, I have Fedarian Mathis from Alabama. I know it's going to be a surprise to some people, but it is what it is. And then number 9, I have DeMarvin Leal, aka Jerry Tillery 2.0. Shout out to our guy Brentley. Since he mentioned that comparison to me, I cannot unsee it. So now all of you get to see it too if you ever watch his tape. At number 8, I have Logan Hall from Houston, a little bit of an undersized interior pass rusher. And then number 7, I have Matthew Butler from Tennessee. And Butler's the guy that I want to highlight here because I was a big fan of him. And, Tyler does all the composite rankings. He was 5th in interior defensive line composite ranking. So very productive and disruptive defensive tackle. I think he checks a lot of the boxes that specifically the Chargers are looking for in terms of like your 3 technique, 4 technique, 5 technique kind of player. I think he is able to really win at the point of attack with his explosiveness. And I mentioned his violent hands. This man was tossing dudes left and right, and especially against Pittsburgh. And his tape against Ole Miss was really funny. We can talk about that in a second. But I just really like the way that he's able to shed blocks. He's not necessarily got the strongest anchor. He is susceptible to getting washed down a little bit, but he always has a counter for whatever the offensive linemen are throwing at him. So that's something that I really appreciate, as opposed to just like continuing to be washed down or like continuing to be blocked. Like he always is just fighting, clawing to be able to go shed the block, to be able to go make a play. And all the tape that I watched shows a very productive player. So I'm a big fan of him. I think the pass rushing ability is a little bit of a work in progress, but he actually shows some good flashes. There's a cross chop in there against Pittsburgh that I watched. There's a bend and a dip and rip. So I think there's enough there for me for Matthew Butler to have him comfortably in that 3rd to 4th round range. And I really like the player. He's somebody that, if the Chargers do decide to not draft a Jordan Davis or a Travis Jones or somebody like that in the 1st and 2nd round, I would be more than okay, waiting until the 4th round to get a guy like Matthew Butler. So he's at 7 for me. Big fan of him.
Yeah, Matthew Butler is the guy that the Ole Miss quarterback tried to Statue of Liberty, and he just holds onto the ball, like pretending that he didn't hand the ball off. And Butler just does not give one shit about it. Like, he runs and just slams the quarterback, causes a sack fumble. It was one of the funniest sacks I've seen because the quarterback was trying to be so slick that then he got run over. I really like Butler. I think the thing that sticks out to me, and he did make my top 10. The thing that sticks out the most to me is his ability to bend and flatten to the quarterback with that rip move. I was just surprised. Like, it's a good, quick first step. Then there's some bend. He can rip and then kind of flatten to the quarterback in a way that, I don't know, ever since Gavino did that breakdown with Akeem Hicks, it's something that not that I've never looked for, a pass rusher flattening to the quarterback, but it's something I sort of look for more because I didn't know that was possible in defensive tackles.
Yeah,
because I've been watching Jerry Tillery, and it's like, what, you can do that? I had no idea. So
our standards for pass rushing defensive tackles are just so low that when we see good ones, we're just like, oh my god.
Oh yeah, it was like the Rashawn Slater effect. It's like, well, you can be good at tackle. So yes, I am a fan of Matthew Butler. That's a good call.
Yeah, and just really quickly, he was coached by Chargers defensive secondary assistant Derek Ansley at the University of Tennessee. So we know that last year the Chargers kind of really drafted a lot of players that they were tied to. And Derek Ansley was the defensive coordinator at Tennessee up until last year. So he is connected to Matthew Butler.
Very nice. Nice. I don't know who's next.
Alex, you want to go next?
I'll go next. And I have Matthew Butler in my top 10 list in the same range as Steven. So I'll just say a quick piece on him. But I really enjoyed watching him. Tested well at the combine as well. And it's just one of those guys where I feel like if he started, kind of more games, I think he ended up starting 26 out of 53 at Tennessee. I just feel like if he had more of those reps, then he'd be closer to being like a top 5 guy consensus in this class. But I did really enjoy his tape, and as Tyler pointed out, the Statue of Liberty clip is just hilarious. You just got to watch it. But I will go from my 10 to 7. I do have Ohio State's Haskell Garrett at number 10. I have John Ridgeway at number 9. I I have 8, Matthew Butler. And number 7, I have Fedarian Mathis. I guess I'll spend this time talking about Haskell Garrett because I think he's kind of interesting. He got shot in the face, and he's still
That was him. That's right.
here. He got shot in the face. Also survived being coached by Urban Meyer, which I think vaults you up the power rankings here. So, but I as a 3 guy, I said he has like pretty good shown on tape. Is a little bit of like a work in progress kind of guy. Which is why I have him at number 10 as opposed to like higher on this list. But had some pretty good production. And I think he obviously went to the Senior Bowl. Didn't put up a good RAS score, but also he's like he's sort of a 3 technique guy. Like I don't think he's supposed to extra when you consider his body type. But is a little bit on the small side. But I do think he shows a lot of power. The one thing you'll have to improve with him, I think, in the NFL is just the amount of pass rushing moves he has. I think he does get a little stumped at times. And that's also the case with someone like DeMarvin Leal, who will come up a little bit later on my list as Jerry Tillery 2.0, like Steven said. Yeah. So I do think he's get why someone would all decide to just make him get shot in the face, which I think is really interesting. So that's why I have him in my top 10.
I'm sorry, Alex. You're frozen for quite a lot of that.
Sounded really convincing though, man. Like a lot of passion.
After the Leal thing, I didn't really catch anything else after that.
It's a sign about Leal.
No, but I do think Haskell Garrett is an interesting guy. He just missed the cut for me. This interior defensive tackle class, I will say that there's always a cutoff, right? And for me, that cutoff was Myron Tagovailoa Amos from Notre Dame. After that, I was just like, these guys are the same. So, Fedarian Mathis, I think, is the interesting one. I'm curious to see where Tyler has him. So, Tyler, why don't you go 10 through 7?
Okay, so at number 10, I have Matthew Butler. At 9, DeMarvin Leal. At 8, I have Perion Winfrey. 7, Ioma Uwazurike from Iowa State. And we're stopping at 7, so I won't go any further. I do want to say one thing about Winfrey, but I want to talk about Leal next. Winfrey, just looking at the stats, like I do like him, and honestly, like 8 through 5 are really close to me. It's just a coin toss, but Winfrey had 11 pressures to open the season against Tulane and Western Carolina, and he got 11 pressures and half of his sacks there, and 11 pressures in those 2 games. But it took him the next 8 games just to pass the next 11, and he only ended up with 12, in those 8 games. So I'm a little worried that this guy has 6 sacks and 25 run stops in like 2 seasons or whatever it is. But that's just a whole other thing. Leal for me is the one. He's the second interior defensive lineman I evaluated, and that was a while ago. And there are flashes there for sure. Like, don't get me wrong, this is not a terrible player, but I wrote down, and it's just the weirdest thing that so many people came down to the same conclusion that he's like Jerry Tillery. And to me, I just could not get that out of my head. And he just keeps moving down the board because of that. Yeah. I'm sure that there are things that he can do at the next level that he'll be fantastic at. I'm sure he can get, he's top 10 on my list. He's not terrible, but man, the guy just can't anchor down. And then he tested poorly, and you start seeing these things, and you think of him as Jerry Tillery. He can't anchor down. He tests poorly, not poorly, but like, Jordan Davis, right? And you have DeMarvin Leal, who's supposed to be kind of a twitched up, move all over, edge rusher, defensive tackle type. He gets like a 7 RAS score. There's just nothing there that's like, wow, this is the traits I really want to bet on. So, I do think him being able to be a stand-up edge rusher on the outside on occasion is really fascinating, but it's fascinating. It's like you being able to do things because you did them in college is great, but can you do them well? And I just don't think that he did everything that was like super, super great. I was like, wow, that's really intriguing. There are some other guys like, who is it? Like, if you are looking for a guy who can play sort of, inside outside a little bit more, I'd rather find, Ioma Uwazurike, like someone who can actually sort of hold up against the run, but is a better pass rusher in my opinion, and can kind of anchor down a little bit more. So yeah, Leal, it's just been, I liked watching him, and it got worse the more I thought about it.
I think he shows some good traits, and Alex can certainly defend him more than the both of us will, because I think he has him higher. But I think he's really quick and explosive off the ball. I think he does have one or two pass rush moves. It's just that if he doesn't win off the line, then he is screwed. So that really is the biggest thing for me. I think you watch him against the top tier competition that he had, then you see kind of his worst games, right? Like you watch him against Alabama and you watch him against Ole Miss, or not Ole Miss, excuse me, Mississippi State. Then you see Charles Cross and Evan Neal and all these guys, and they just dominated against DeMarvin Leal. So he's just not somebody that I'm super interested in. I did not grade the Iowa State defensive tackle, but I will say that guy had a pretty good game against Trevor Penning.
He did.
Who is a barring a shocking result, it is going to be a top 15 pick. So I think that matters too. So Tyler mentioned Perrion Winfrey from Oklahoma. He is 6th on my list. At 5, I have Neil Farrell from LSU. And then at 4, I have Josh Pascal from Kentucky. So that's going to be the biggest surprise, I feel like, for people. Josh Pascal listed as an edge rusher on PFF and TDN. I have him kicking inside. He lost weight for the combine, which I did not really understand. I wanted him to test with the interior defensive lineman, but I think he's got really ideal. I think he has the ideal traits and mentality to be that 3-4-5 technique kind of player that Brandon Staley really seems to like when you're talking about Roy Robinson Harris or when you're talking about Draymond Jones. I think Josh Pascal fits that to a T. Very disruptive and productive player. Like I said, Tyler has him 7th at edge instead of defensive tackle. So that shows you just kind of really how productive he is. So he's somebody that I'm really interested in kicking inside. I think he's so well built out and he's so violent in his approach that I just am really a big fan of his game. If you watch his tape, he is more disruptive against guards and centers. And so that's kind of my thinking there, along with his physicality and frame, that I would want to kick him inside. So I'm sure that's going to be a surprise to some, but I would like to see Josh Pascal, after he lost weight, add like 15, 20 pounds and really play as an inside physical interior rusher and be able to kind of win against guards and centers, as opposed to trying to be a bendy, twitchy edge rusher, which I just don't really think suits him. But as an interior guy, clearly I am a big fan of his.
Yeah, I wasn't the biggest fan of him as an edge rusher. I don't recall if I had him on my top 10. He might have been 11th or 10th or something like that. But I remember writing down like, man, this guy could be a lot better on the inside. And so the more I thought about it, the more I kind of, thought of it that way. Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. He's a guy that went up because the more I thought about it, unlike a DeMarvin Leal. I just think he, unlike like a DeMarvin Leal, like Leal, you want to, hopefully you can get him to be a better run defender. Maybe he bulks up and maybe work on the pass rush. I think Pascal just immediately is going to be a pretty decent run defender for you. And he can stay on the field while he develops that pass rush. And like right now, he's just a very quick, like gap shooter, pass rusher on the interior. And that's great. But I think because he can stay on the field on early downs as well, that makes him really valuable. So he's not, what's he for you? 5th?
He's 4th.
4th. Okay. He's not that high on my list, but I do really like him as well.
Yeah, I think it'll be kind of interesting to see what happens with like a lot of these guys after you get really past the first 3, because I feel like we have a pretty good idea that you get kind of Davis, Wyatt, and Jones being the first 3 that go off the board. And then I think, as we kind of said, after probably Perrion Winfrey, and even the evaluators are a little bit lower on Neil Farrell than I think we are kind of combined.
Yes.
It just kind of becomes a little bit random. So I'll be curious to see what happens with that. As for my 6-4, I do have Texas A&M's DeMarvin Leal at number 6, which is kind of going to be my disagreement, but Neil Farrell at 5, and then Perrion Winfrey at 4. So, okay, I do get the Jerry Tillery 2.0 thing. The one thing I have with that is that Jerry Tillery just has some really bad work ethic, man. Like, I mean, there are some problems that I think are localized to Jerry Tillery, and I just feel like that's not going to apply to every prospect a little bit, especially when you talk about like the dumb penalties that Jerry Tillery commits and stuff like that. And I do think Leal has that kind of like upward trajectory. I also just believe watching his film, he's a little bit of a more fluid mover than like Jerry Tillery is. Like Jerry Tillery is very much like one speed all the time, to his detriment, and even his success when he does get a sack. So I feel like Leal was a bit more of a fluid mover, and also like he is going up against Evan Neal and some of those guys. I do feel like you can kind of create a defensive lineman where he does bulk up a little bit, gain some of that functional strength. And I feel like we would be saying less of the Jerry Tillery stuff. I do get kind of the limited skill set, but his pure attributes alone and sort of where he can go in the NFL, I couldn't go quite as low as 9, because then you're putting him like, I don't know, on my list with like Ridgeway and Garrett, and I think he has more upside than that. So for me, if we're talking about them as prospects, that's kind of why I had Leal higher. And he did struggle against some of those high competition games like Alabama, but also like a lot of people struggle against Alabama. Like, I don't know, that is a thing. So I'm not the biggest Leal defender, but I do think that the Tillery comparison kind of works in terms of describing his game a little bit, but I do think he can take it further than Jerry Tillery, who I think was kind of always limited, versus I can kind of see Leal getting a little bit better against the run.
Oh, I didn't realize we had Gavino in the chat. What's up, Gavino? Hope everything's going well. Yeah, I think for me, it's just like the lack of variety in ways that Leal can win. And as Gavino points out, just like the lack of strength and anchor against the run. So I totally get what you're saying. Like, he definitely, shows like a good athlete and very mobile on tape. And I do think he's not going to be a first round pick like Jerry Tillery. And I do think that obviously we would feel very different about Jerry Tillery if he were not a first round pick. So hopefully he goes into a better situation without the expectations. And like, I think he's a fine prospect. I just like these other guys better.
We'd also feel very differently about Jerry Tillery if we weren't Chargers fans.
Would we know who he is?
Probably not.
No, if we were fans of another team and we had a podcast about another team, we would just be like, man, we're cooking that 99 guy a lot today, huh?
Well, there was during one of my interviews with the Chiefs guy I did, he was like, oh, Jerry Tillery is always good against us. And I'm like, huh? What?
Kind of.
I guess.
Well, Jerry Tillery did have that. He had that 2021 game, right, where he just he got like 5 quarterback hits on Mahomes because other people were opening stuff up for him. Like, that's probably
true.
the one game where I think Jerry Tillery had that like explosion. And ever
week
since
2
then,
in 2020, he was good as well. Yeah, I mean, when they had like 30 pressures against Mahomes too. So I mean, I guess that is kind of a fair comment.
Jerry Tillery, when Patrick Mahomes doesn't have an offensive line, elite.
All right, Tyler, let's get to your list here.
Okay, so number 6, I do have Josh Pascal from Kentucky.
Okay.
At number 5, I have Fedarian Mathis. At number 4, I have Neil Farrell Jr. I'm obviously very high on Neil Farrell Jr., but I do want to talk about Fedarian Mathis because I thought it was very interesting the way I came about like sort of liking him, because everyone has him as like a power or anchor guy, and that's what I graded him worst on. So I don't know what games that I missed. Because everyone, like, I think Gavino agrees it's like power and anchor. I think you graded him, Steven.
I do too, yeah.
Good power anchor.
That's the only thing I like about him.
And I felt the opposite. It was so weird. Like, to me, like, so that's why I want to talk about it. Like, to me, Mathis, I see a twitchy pass rusher, along the interior with a half decent array of pass rush moves. The long arm, the jab. He's got a rip. I sometimes see that, hesitation, swiper club back inside. A lot of these guys have that. The thing I guess it is to me is in the run game. And it's funny because, again, I didn't see him like a, Jordan Davis be able to anchor and power the way I would have liked to. But to me, the way he's so good laterally and the quickness that he has to beat, front side blockers on the wide zone blocking or whatever, I just thought I was impressed with that. And granted, you can't always it's not just going to be like a, halfback toss or some sort of outside zone lead or whatever. But I thought the way he was able to approach that laterally and the way he could win laterally against the run like that was very impressive. So You have a guy who you guys apparently think he's super powerful and has an anchor, and I think he's a very decent, pass rusher who can win on some, zone blocking. So to me, like, again, my 5 through 8, it's a coin toss. I almost don't care which one I put in front, but to me, I see sort of the traits that Mathis has. Those are the ones that I want to bet on the most. I know Gavino still hates me because he has him at 2. I don't quite see that yet. He's actually going to be graded probably behind Pascal for me, to be honest, and he was behind Uwazurike for me, but I'm just going to try to bet on the traits of what I've seen and kind of also take your guys' word for it that there maybe just were games where I missed that anchor in power, because I saw some pass rush potential, a guy who can work some things into the run game. And so I think because he can, I think, play all 3 downs, I believe in him, but only at 5.
Well, I mean, you believe in him more than we do. So he didn't make your list, right, Alex?
Mathis?
Talking about
Fedarian
we're talking
Mathis,
about
yeah.
Mathis. Yeah, I had him at 7.
Oh, okay.
No, so he was on my list.
Okay,
I
so
just
I had him
didn't
at 10.
mention him
Alex has
before.
7. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, high variance.
Yeah, that's the one so far. I will say I want to talk about Neil Farrell here for a second because all of us
Please.
are big fans of his, and he's like 383rd or whatever on TDN's big board. Like, what the hell are we watching with Neil Farrell, man? So I've mentioned the composite rankings that Tyler has done. Neil Farrell has the highest ranking in terms of the composite ranking. Like, this man, I know, like, you watch him and you look at his physical profile, like how he checked into the combine, and you think like, oh, like he's just this stocky nose tackle. He's Tyler Shelvin 2.0. And that is not the case, man. Like, he is highly disruptive player against the pass rush too. So I have him at 5. Really, the only, like, him and Josh Pascal are graded very similar to me. I think there's like 0.4 difference between the two. But Pascal, I think, has more upside as a pass rusher just because of his profile and his traits. So that's why I have him higher. But I love Neil Farrell, man. I think we all wish that he would have tested a little bit better and maybe lost some weight a little bit before the combine. But I think in terms of getting like a 4th round nose tackle, like, he's clearly the best option there. And so, I'm a huge fan of Neil Farrell. I think he's way too low on people's boards. I've seen some other podcasters that I respect have him at like 10 or off their top 10. And I just don't see him. And I think you watch specifically against UCLA and specifically against Florida were the 2 games where I was like, okay, like, this guy has real pass rushing chops, and he's got the hand usage that I really like to see. He's got the anchor. He can shed blocks, set the line of scrimmage. So I'm a big fan of Neil Farrell, and I wish he were getting more hype around just kind of social media from what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I like Neil Farrell enough to put him at number 5, and I think we're all on number 5 or number 4 with him. So yeah, I think he's really good. The one kind of conspiracy theory I have is just like, I feel like there's a lot of like LSU was bad this year, so maybe LSU prospects kind of get pushed down a little bit versus, Alabama obviously is Alabama, and so they kind of got pushed up. But I also do think it's kind of, this is one of those cases where I also think you use the combine as a resource more than you use the combine as like the be all end all. Because if you saw 1 point whatever RAS score on Neil Farrell, you'd be like, oh, I'm really concerned. But if you watch his tape and then saw that score, you'd kind of be like, oh, well, like, this isn't great, but also it doesn't change my view on him as a player versus, I don't know, if you see a player who's slow on tape and then he tests, really poorly, then I think you kind of, have to kind of change your priors or like confirm your priors a little bit. But with Neil Farrell, I just, I think the RAS score just kind of wasn't indicative of him. And some of these guys just have bad days at the combine.
Yeah, I was so surprised by the RAS score. And granted, I don't know what, shape he's in, or I don't know, how he runs a 40. Like, I wouldn't have really guessed that. But I mean, this guy we talked about the composite rankings, just the way he tested, or he ranked out statistically. I mean, 2nd in run stops, 3rd in run stop rate, 4th in average depth of tackle, 5th in pass rush productivity, 3rd in pass rush win rate. He's the only guy, I think, on the entire list to be top 8 in every category. And yet he's on TDN's, like, on their predictive board, 250 something, on their big board, 300 something. I think Bleacher Report and Pro Football Focus have him as like a top 75 player, which, like, that works.
Yeah.
That works, especially as a guy who's a sort of perceived nose tackle. But the thing about him, man, like, I think he's a better pass rusher than run defender, in my opinion. Not that he's like a really like developed pass rusher, but he's so quick. He knows how to attack that half man kind of perfectly. He can blow past through the guard. They've worked him on stunts. He's so quick to me. I didn't really see that at the combine, unfortunately. It's not going to show up on the RAS score, but where I do think it shows up is if you watch him, I think nobody was bear hugged more off the line than Neil Farrell. If you watch him against guys, he's so much quicker than a lot of these guys that you'll see them kind of go high and bear hug him because he gets into their chest faster. And to me, I think he's honestly of the, he's like the last, true 2 down. Like I feel good about him, or no, excuse me, 3 down, 2-way. So pass rush and run defense. I feel good about him there in a way that I really don't feel about with like, I think Pascal can work on the pass rush. I think Mathis can work on the run defense. I think Farrell, yes, he's an nose tackle, but I think he can play all 3 downs. And so he's 4th for me. I'm really high on him. He's a good dude. I like the LSU guys apparently. A big Tyler Shelvin fan, big Fehoko fan this year, big Farrell Jr. fan here. Don't know what it is. And to me, this guy being number 1 in our composite rankings and so high in every stat category, but being on a bad LSU team and him to have all these numbers, despite being the only guy there, at least that's draft eligible along that defensive line, if I'm not mistaken, that's pretty impressive. So I think he's just far too low on TDN's board. I don't get it. They have him, I think, as an undrafted free agent in their grades, at least the grade that's posted, and that just does not make any sense to me.
I think the NFL Network guys have him as like a 6th, 7th round pick. Like,
jeez,
I don't get that. Like, I mean, he could go that low, but I think from an evaluation standpoint, like I think he should be higher. So, big Neil Farrell fans on this show, which I love to see.
Mm-hmm.
So, number 3 for me, I have Jordan Davis there. I know that's going to be kind of crazy. Everybody's going to hate that. Number 2, I have Devontae Wyatt. The Georgia teammates go back to back. I do have those 2 graded very closely for what it's worth, but I do think that Devontae Wyatt's pass rushing ability really just gives him a much higher ceiling in terms of true impact in the NFL as opposed to Jordan Davis's, and that really is the difference there. At number 1, I do have Travis Jones. This is somebody that I really love to see. I went to watch him in person when UConn played Fresno State here, and I was like, man, who's this defensive tackle that's just like running all over the place, just wrecking shit? And it was Travis Jones. So my in-game experience was obviously very good. His tape against Clemson was just fantastic, man. He was so disruptive in that game. And then, of course, at the Senior Bowl, where he was one of the best players there. So I think there are certainly some concerns, particularly I think he does have the tendency to get a little high in his pad level. I think Jordan Davis also has that tendency. But to me, you watch the upside in terms of the pass rushing ability for Travis Jones, and I think he's the best 2-way defensive tackle prospect in this class in that regard, because I do think he gives you legitimate pass rushing future as well as a dominant run defender floor going forward. So I'm a big fan of his. Very disruptive, very quick off the ball, great hand usage. He's got a double swipe, he's got a swim move, he's got a rip. And so really, like, you wouldn't expect to pop on Connecticut tape and see the best defensive tackle in the class and the most well-rounded, but I think he is right there. And I know that Jordan Davis tested like a freak, but Travis Jones also tested like a freak, man. I think his RAS score was like 9.6 or something like that. So obviously Jordan Davis's athleticism, what he did at the combine was insane, but Travis Jones also in that same conversation for somebody who's 6'6", 335 pounds.
Yeah, he's awesome. I think of the top 3, and I think we all have the same, or like a same sort of combination of the top 3. Yeah. I feel like that's the upside you want to bet on, because when he makes plays, I feel like he makes like some like the biggest plays. To me, like I don't have him number 1 because of some inconsistency, but the plays that he makes, that's what you want to bet on so much. And that's why he's probably the 3rd guy into your defensive lineman taken. And I totally get it. Like that's a guy, like you said, who's pretty balanced as both a run defender and as a pass rusher. So yeah, it's obviously a good call there. These 3 guys are all great. You're muted, Alex.
Alex, you're muted. Still muted.
I know. I was just gonna say the concept of Connecticut and Clemson tape is really funny, and the fact that there's one person on Connecticut who belongs on the same field as people with Clemson
Yeah.
is just a credit to Travis Jones. I have him at number 3. I guess Tyler will go next. But yeah, to me, other than the 2 Georgia guys, I didn't think that there was much distinction between them at all. And obviously, all 3 of our top 3 guys tested incredibly well at the combine and kind of backed up their tape as well. So I think betting on the Travis Jones future is sort of good. But yeah, like Tyler, I did have some of the same inconsistency problems. But overall, I think he's going to be a great prospect. And unfortunately, probably out of round 2 range for the Chargers now based on that combine.
And also, Alex, I think you're second.
Huh?
Oh, was I second? Going second? Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
notice if
I
I
don't
was.
care.
All right, well, I'll get to my list then. I do have number 3, Travis Jones. I do have number 2, Devontae Wyatt, and I do have number 1, Jordan Davis. This is very predictable. I feel like if you just follow me or anything I've been saying, I think Steven for a little bit did have me kind of buying the like, okay, he's only a 2-down player, and I understood that. But then the combine came, and I'm like, I can't do it. And he ends up scoring the second best combine score of all time to Calvin Johnson. Like that's just an insane sentence that came out of my mouth. For a guy of his size and stature. But to me, just like on tape, he was. Everyone talks about him as a run defender, but like what he creates, I guess, in the pass rush game as well. Even though maybe he's not getting those sacks, but he's also like opening up other holes for those guys to like consistently go through. And it's why Devontae Wyatt has a couple sacks, and it's why a lot of these other Georgia defensive guys have sacks too, in addition to how good they are. So just an absolute freak of nature. I do get the 2-down thing, and like that's probably why a lot of teams, will pass on him before you get to like 15. That's probably going to be like the first spot where he could theoretically be taken. A lot of people project him to the Chargers as well in these mock drafts. But to me, he's like kind of the most slam dunk prospect that you have in this list. And for me, that just kind of counts for something. I do understand the lack of pass rush value. But for me, I am going to go Jordan Davis, number 1.
No, I totally get that. And for, it's being I'm not a Jordan Davis guy or whatever. Like, I personally don't care much about the stamina issues that people are talking about. I mean, the man lost 23 pounds or something before the combine. Like, I have no doubt that he's going to get into good shape to play football and play a 3-down player. Like, I think we also have to realize that, like he had 2 other first rounders playing next to him. Like, of course, you're going to take out Jordan Davis for Devontae Wyatt and Jalen Carter and Trayvon Walker, for that matter, to rush the passer. So I'm not too concerned about his weight. I'm not too concerned about his stamina. That's not really why I have him down here. I think, I think most of my concerns are relative to the lack of a pass rush, and the really high pad level kind of pops up every once in a while more than I would like to see. So again, I am not concerned about his stamina. I'm not concerned about the snap counts. I think that changes in the NFL, and I think he has shown that he has the ability to handle that kind of change, really care about his eating, and be able to get in shape. So I'm not worried about that at all.
Yeah, I'm certainly very what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. I'm happy that he showed up, with less. I can't speak today. He dropped weight, and I think unlike a Daniel Falele, where that is like a concern, and the weight just stayed the same, which maybe that's good for him. But Jordan Davis did show up. He did lose weight, and he clearly worked on his drills because he tested again like a freak. To me, by the way, my list is Travis Jones 3, Devontae Wyatt 2, Jordan Davis 1. So I am in agreement with Alex there. We do have the same first guy. There's a play versus Kentucky, and he didn't win this, but I just thought it was so impressive. It's a quarterback sneak, and the 2 guards in the center both converge on him for the quarterback sneak. The quarterback completely botches the snap. I think the center botches the snaps. The whole play ends up being crap. But the 2 guards in the center are on top of Davis, and they do initially beat him, and he ends up getting, going on all fours with both his hands are on the ground. And then at some point, he just like stands up with 3 people on him and he goes full Hulk out of the movies and just deadlifts all of them. It's one of the craziest things. And maybe it was kind of because they knew the play was sort of over, but like him be able to just do that in that game is fantastic. And then later in the game, the guard blocks him one-on-one. He just throws him to the ground. To me,
Yeah.
It's very obvious. I don't know if you'll like this comparison, but like in the same way Ike Mekwonu is like his calling card is the best of any tackle. What he does in the run game is the best of any tackle. And that's why some people like a Brandon Thorne have number one. To me, what Jordan Davis does at what he's good at and why he's at least a surefire guy at what he's good at, I don't think anyone defends the run better than him. And again, like he's number one in run stop rate, number two in average depth of tackle. He hasn't missed a single tackle in 2 seasons. Like there's nobody in the group that can reset the line of scrimmage in the run game like he can. I think there's no one that can use his hands to stack and shed while keeping his eyes on that ball carrier. I don't think anybody else can really do that like him on a consistent basis. But what separates him and why someone like Ben Fennell, I believe, has him more as like that, not a gap guy, but actually like I forget what
a penetrator. Yeah.
Yes, a penetrator. Yeah. He's not unique here, but his ability to be so quick off the line. There was a point where I watched so many, reps where like, man, like these guys aren't blocking well. They're not, and maybe that's part of it. The offensive line wasn't blocking well, but at some point it's like, maybe he's just really fast and maybe he's just faster than anybody else can keep up with. He's just a 341 pound, whatever he is, gap shooting monster. And so, we all know he's not going to be a guy who's going to impact the game. It's like, he doesn't have a rip move. There's no bend. There's no dip. There's nothing. There's no secret. He's exactly what you think he is. And him being, 2, 3, 4, whatever for some people, I totally get. To me, the impact he has in the passing game, I think it comes down to one of 3 things. It's his ability to obviously free up other people. That's obvious. 2, just straight up power, A-gap pressure. And then 3, just being able to, what was the other thing I was going to say? Forget it. Point is, I forgot the third thing. But yes, I'm a big Jordan Davis fan. I just think what he does is better than anybody else. He's a freak. If teams are going to be facing some sort of, unstoppable force, they need to have an immovable object, and that's him. The guy who's got the balance, he's got the leverage, he has this weird quickness to him. He tested off the charts. He was my number one before the combine, but he's definitely the number one now because of what he did. He can push. He's a guy that resets so often that I see him even on RPOs, like creating some sort of pressure or collapse in the pocket on an RPO where it's like throw or hands it off or whatever it is. Like he's able to do it so quickly, squeeze the interior of the pocket so much and accelerate the clock for the quarterback. While I don't think he'll be a true pass rusher, I think he can affect the pass enough where there's value there. So he's my number one, and I'm very confident with that.
Yeah, I totally get what you guys are saying. I think that well-roundedness for me just kind of made the difference. But one of the things that I do have in my notes for Jordan Davis is that he's not a line of scrimmage setter. He's a line of scrimmage wrecker or destroyer. The man just like does whatever he wants. And Jack in the chat is pointing out like he's a really high character player too. So he was a team captain there. Clearly cares about his body with the way that he has. Yes, Young West, we do talk about the chat. I swear this always happens. Like we have stuff to talk about. Yeah. Jack is talking about just his high character. And so I do think like he checks a lot of boxes for the Chargers. Like we know how Brandon Staley likes the Georgia program. It definitely fits a need. And I think he is a high character guy. He's a team captain. And to me, like, I think the most encouraging thing that I've seen him do is he's out here in California working with the Dr. Pass Rush guy who typically only trains edge rushers. And he committed to training Jordan Davis on his pass rush. And I think to me, like that shows that Davis is really committed to becoming a good, well-rounded football player. And sure, there's a bet on the traits conversation, and maybe I'm a little guilty of not following that to a T like I should. But I like Jordan Davis a lot. If he were the pick at 17, I don't hate that as much as I used to. I still would prefer an edge rusher or a corner or a receiver. But like I think he does fit what the Chargers want to do. I think he fits what the Chargers culture is. So like I wouldn't be surprised if he's there if he were the pick, but I just prefer other premium positions better, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, and I think we talk about how high character of a player he is too, right? We sort of talked about DeMarvin Leal and how he kind of went against the best competition and was like not great. Jordan Davis up against Alabama,
It was
not the same
fantastic.
situation in that championship game, right? So that's kind of another instance, and you just saw that kind of consistently all year from him. Whenever he went against the best competition, he was at his best, and he's going to be going up against a lot of those kinds of guys in the NFL too. So. Yeah, there's no question marks really for me at this point there.
Yeah, I'm really done watching Georgia versus Clemson, Alabama,
So
and
done, man.
Kentucky for like the fifth time. I still have to do that safety. The next year we're gonna have I'm sure the next 3 prospects from Georgia are all good.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, we're going to be watching Georgia, Clemson, and Alabama tape for the next like 8 years of this. So
Yeah, man, it's I think I've watched that Georgia Clemson game. I think like at least 8 or 9 times at this point, because Clemson has Justin Ross too. So it's like that was one of the Justin Ross games. So yeah, it's really interesting. So we'll wrap it up with this. I think everybody kind of expects the Chargers to be in the defensive tackle draft market. Just want to do your favorite Chargers defensive tackle draft prospect out of the first round. So I'll get that conversation started. And I think for me, I said it already. Josh Pascal is somebody that I'm really interested in adding to this team. Wouldn't cost a first or second round pick. So I think he really fits what this team wants to do in that 4-5 technique kind of role. And so if the Chargers do, let's say, sign a Sebastian Joseph Day and nose tackle's not necessarily a need and they kind of pass on it, I think Josh Pascal in the 3rd or 4th round would make a lot of sense for me.
yeah, I'll say this kind of depends on what they do in free agency, but like assuming they add like a Sebastian Joseph Day kind of player, they sort of fortify defensive tackle before the draft like we expect them to. I'll kind of go with Matthew Butler just because I think he's an interesting draft prospect that you could probably get 4th, 5th round. And maybe they take one before that anyway. In terms of beefing this room up, depends if they re-sign Justin Jones, but he's a guy that I just think is kind of going to pop in the NFL in a way that he didn't really have the opportunity to in college. And so I think anytime you have a chance to get one of those guys in the draft, I would do it.
Yeah, I agree. And then I guess sort of in that same vein, Ioma Uwazurike, another guy who can be your, defensive
Well
tackle.
done, by the way.
Dude, I'm just guessing over here. If that's right, then I'm so thrilled. But he, like you mentioned, he gave Penning problems, and there were 2 plays in couple of plays, and that's also the play where Penning, for no reason, just blocked him in the back, even though he was completely not even part of the play anymore. Just another character thing for Penning. But he beat him on a long arm, and he would have beaten him if the running back didn't chip. And he beat him later on a rip, where like sort of tip and rip on the outside. But Penning ended up holding him or hands to the face or something like that. He
Shocker.
around his neck. Yeah, shocker, right? Yeah, par for course. So he would have beaten him at least twice. And this is a guy that you can sort of put as your 4-5 tech sort of guy. I really like him. I think he's got that long arm. You see a swipe. You've been kind of seeing that swim, that rip. Again, gave Penning problems as a top 15 pick. Probably the number 4 tackle on most boards, and he gave him some problems. And so finding that guy, if you get Akeem Hicks, and so you get Uwazurike and develop him behind, let's say you get him, like I have a 3rd round grade on him, I believe. Yeah, 3rd round grade on him. But if you can get him in like the 4th round, or even if you take him in the 3rd round, because by golly, Tom Telesco will take a reach in the 3rd round. I think that's completely fine. Like I understand why you would take him. There's not a lot there against the run right now, but you see the traits, you see the film, you see the pass rush moves. Not a whole lot against the run. But there is some flash of stack shed that when he does use some of his length. So I think he's definitely a guy that has a lot of appeal as a pass rusher. You can use him on twists and stunts and stuff like that. I think finding him later on is a fantastic pairing for the Chargers.
Edwin Martinez says Penning equals Richie Incognito. He says just kidding. I think that's actually pretty accurate, at least in terms of play style. I called him the Ryan Jensen of tackles, but Ryan Jensen baits people into penalties. He doesn't commit them himself. So I think that the Richie Incognito thing is accurate. Arjun, why you gotta bring up bad things, man? Arjun talking about bringing back Cortez Brown.
I still haven't recovered from that show that we did after they cut all the good players, and then I'm like, oh, I still didn't really recover from that show. And people are like, you don't know about football, and I'm like, by the end of the season, we did.
Yeah, I love how it's like we're talking about needing a wide receiver and a defensive tackle on this segment when literally last year they cut the wide receiver.
Where they could have gotten those from.
Also, shout out my mom. I see the super chat says you guys rock. I tend to agree that we also rock, but thank you, my mom. She has 2 degrees and she would know this stuff.
Yeah, so I gotta add the Iowa State defensive tackle on my list, and as well as Eric Johnson, who is Gavino's favorite one. So for the record, Gavino has Jordan Davis lower than me, so go yell at him instead of me. Just kidding, man. Gavino's awesome. He does some great work. So
he likes Jerry Tillery. I'm just gonna throw it out there. Get out of the chat, Gavino.
Gavino, come on. You just need to. You watch the film, but I need you to come home with the Jerry Tillery thing, man.
All good. So that's gonna do it for us today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to this show. You know, it's been a great live chat. Hopefully you enjoyed our conversations on Russell Wilson, Mike Williams, and the top 10 interior defensive tackles. So from here on for the next couple of weeks, it's going to be all free agency. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on lately about specifically JC Jackson and some corners. So, you know, Sunday we are going to do our final free agency primer, going over all the rumors and things like that we're hearing. So Sunday is going to be a lot of fun. And then next week, it's going to be a bunch of free agency madness. I cannot wait to cover that. So if you are watching this, turn those YouTube notifications on. You will not want to miss any of our emergency podcasts, depending on who the Chargers sign. And as always, if you're listening to the audio version, please leave us a rating or review on the podcast platform of your choice. That's going to do it, guys. As always, bolt up.